Mahatma I was once one of the most feared and famous players in RuneScape. His PKing videos were everywhere, his clan ruled the wilderness, and for a time, he was untouchable. But the legend people remember isn't the full story. The way he built his fortune was kept secret, for a good reason. His clan would win official Jagex trophies, but come just short of immortalizing Mahatma himself inside of RuneScape. And one day, without warning, Mahatma would disappear from the internet entirely. But why? This is the story of how one of RuneScape's greatest legends rose, ruled, and vanished. To tell this story, we need to go all the way back to December of 2001. It was around this time that Mahatma I would discover RuneScape and sign up for his first account. Back then, he was a pretty average player, and the highest stat he ever reached was level 63 mining before he abandoned the account. Not because he was unhappy with the progress, but because he thought his character was sort of ugly. Back then, the makeover mage didn't exist yet, so the outfit and hairstyle you chose during your first time logging in was permanent. He had also discovered an area of RuneScape that really intrigued him, but his account wasn't suited for: the wilderness. The wilderness was RuneScape's most dangerous area. It was the only place in the game where players were allowed to attack and kill one another. But if you were brave enough to enter, it also offered rewards found nowhere else. The game's only runite rocks were located there, and some of its monsters could drop what was, at the time, the most powerful helmet in the entire game. The wilderness inspired Mahatma to create his second account, one built entirely for player killing. Originally, he wanted this account to be a pure. The meaning of the word pure has changed a lot over the years, but in the early days of RuneScape, pure meant purely melee, meaning pures would only level skills that actively increase their hand-to-hand melee combat abilities. RuneScape measured your overall fighting power with a single number called your combat level. The more combat skills you trained, the higher that number went. You could also only fight players with a similar combat level to you unless you were in the very deep wilderness. A pure kept their combat level lower by deliberately avoiding skills like prayer, magic, and ranged, and putting nearly everything into melee. That way, they could fight players with a similar combat level, but hit much harder in close combat than opponents with more balanced accounts. But before long, Mahatma decided to change course. Instead, he wanted this new account to be a ranger. But why would he build an account around what was, at the time, the game's worst combat skill? On its own, ranged was very weak. While it allowed you to attack from a distance, it completely fell apart the moment someone reached you. If a player closed the distance and hit you with melee, the game would force you into melee combat for 3 turns. During that time, you couldn't use ranged weapons, eat, or run. But in a group, ranged could be incredibly powerful. There were no multi-combat zones in RuneScape yet, which meant melee fights were always one-on-one. Once 2 players were engaged in melee combat, no one else could join that fight using melee. Magic and ranged didn't follow the same rules. A player using either style could attack anyone, even if they were already locked in a melee fight with someone else. That made ranged especially valuable in group encounters. While melee fighters kept targets trapped in combat, rangers could attack freely from a distance, stacking damage in a way that melee simply couldn't. Mahatma would team up with players with account builds known as prayer beasts. These accounts focused on high strength and limited prayer, usually capped at 43, giving them access to key damage boosting and damage protection prayers without raising their combat level too high. But before long, Mahatma got bored of just being a prayer beast's helper. He just couldn't get kills on his own with his account build, so he decided to sign up for yet another RuneScape account, which he would train to be a prayer beast. That third account finally allowed Mahatma to rack up kills consistently on his own. But even then, it wasn't perfect. He knew the build could be refined and optimized even further, and before long, he abandoned this account too. Soon after, he created a 4th account. This time, he gave it the name that would one day become iconic: Mahatma I. He didn't know it yet, but this account would be the one that defined him, bringing a level of fame and wealth few players ever reached, rivaling even names like Zezima, before he mysteriously vanished. Now, Mahatma didn't become a legend overnight. His rise was built on consistency and smart decision making, a theme that carries over nicely into today's sponsor, AG1. AG1 is a daily health drink formulated to support gut health and fill in common nutrient gaps, with 75 plus ingredients including vitamins, minerals, superfoods, and probiotics, all in one scoop. I take it every morning, and preparing it takes less than 30 seconds. It helps me feel hydrated and steady going into the day without relying on stimulants or quick fixes. It's a simple, consistent habit to implement, and there's no better time to take your health seriously than right now. If you're ready to give it a try, use my link to get 3 free AG1 travel packs, 3 free travel packs of their new sleep supplement AGZ, plus free vitamin D3 plus K2, and an AG1 welcome kit with your first AG1 subscription order. Mahatma I built this new account to be, in his own words, a Rune two-hander looting machine. At the time, the Rune two-handed sword was the most powerful and most expensive weapon in the entire game. Creating one required level 99 smithing, a level only a handful of players had, such as the smithing legend Blue Rose 13X. As a result, Rune two-handers were incredibly rare, highly coveted, and worth enormous amounts of gold. So how did Mahatma build an account designed to take them? Well, he leveled his stats like so. He would get to 40 attack, so he could use rune weaponry, 50 strength so he could hit hard, 4 prayer so he could use the burst of strength prayer, which increased his strength by 5%. And he left his defense level at just 1, deliberately as low as possible. It was risky, but it placed him at the perfect combat level to overwhelm opponents before they even realized what they were dealing with. All of this added up to a total combat level of just 33. Most players he fought had no idea what was coming. He would specifically seek out players who were Scold. A player becomes Scold if they attack another player in the wilderness unprovoked. The Scold would last for 20 minutes, and upon death, Scold players would lose every item they were carrying instead of getting to keep their most valuable 3. Now these players, in theory, could use the protect item prayer, which saves your most valuable item on death even if you're Scold. But at Mahatma's combat level, most of his opponents didn't have a high enough prayer level to use it. And because of that, Mahatma wasn't just winning fights, he was easily walking away with their Rune two-handers. But just as Mahatma mastered this style of PKing, RuneScape itself was beginning to change. Behind the scenes, Jagex was already working on a new version of the game called RuneScape 2. The beta for RuneScape 2 launched on December 1st, 2003, and Mahatma was quick to give it a try. Almost immediately, it became clear that this was a very different game. The old 3-turn melee combat cycle was gone. Players could now run or eat at any time, and magic and ranged were no longer treated as secondary combat styles. On top of that, the entire formula used to calculate combat levels had been reworked. In other words, the wilderness meta he had mastered was disappearing. Once RuneScape 2 exited beta and fully launched, Mahatma made the jump immediately, and just as quickly he began retraining his account. His first priority was magic, and there were 2 clear reasons why. First, it offered protection. Magic was everywhere in early RuneScape 2. In RuneScape 1, a severe rune shortage meant very few players ever trained the skill, something I've covered in detail in a previous video. RuneScape 2 changed that completely. The rune shortage was over, powerful new spells were added, and mages flooded the wilderness almost overnight. Raising his magic level increased Mahatma's magic defense, giving him a way to survive encounters that would have been fatal before, especially given how low his defense level still was. Due to a long-standing glitch from RuneScape 1 that could randomly grant experience in any skill on login, his defense was no longer level 1, but it remained firmly in the single digits. Second, he wanted to use those new spells too. At just level 20 magic, Mahatma gained access to Bind, a spell that could freeze an opponent in place for nearly 5 seconds. And in a version of RuneScape where melee no longer kept players stuck in a fight, being able to stop someone in their tracks was massive. He also began training his prayer level, giving him access to prayers that could temporarily boost his strength even further than just 5%. With RuneScape 2's changes to the combat level formula, he was no longer worried about keeping his prayer level locked at just level 4. Around this time, the meaning of the word pure would shift. Rather than being tied solely to the melee combat style, it became more of a broader philosophy. Build your account for offense, minimize defense, and stay as low level as possible while hitting far above your weight. Training skills like magic and ranged was no longer frowned upon in the pure community. It was encouraged if you could justify it. Now, ever since Mahatma abandoned his Ranger account years back, he had always preferred to PK solo. He didn't want teammates, he didn't need them, and he liked it that way. Until one encounter changed everything. Sometime around March of 2004, while PKing near the Dark Warrior's fortress, Mahatma ran into a pair of mages. One of them stood out immediately, as he was wearing a Santa hat, one of the rarest and most valuable items in the game at the time. Luckily for Mahatma, they were not inside a multi-combat zone, so both mages couldn't attack him at the same time. The Santa hat-wearing mage attacked Mahatma first, but Mahatma managed to kill him. Almost immediately after, he was jumped by the other mage and killed. He rushed back to the scene, hoping to recover the loot, only to arrive just in time to watch the Santa hat get picked up by someone else, a player called the Best PK, another pure the same level as Mahatma. Moments later, another pile appeared, belonging to the mage who had killed Mahatma. That mage had just been taken down by the Best PK. The two had never met before, but instead of keeping the loot to himself, the Best PK offered to split the value of the Santa hat with Mahatma, something kind of unheard of. That moment marked a big turning point. From then on, Mahatma and the Best PK began PKing together regularly. Other pures began to gravitate towards them, and they would soon form RuneScape 2's first pure clan, the Mayhem Makers. This group was constantly PKing, rarely stopping to train, which meant they stayed at the same combat level for long stretches of time. Mayhem Makers wouldn't log in and ask if anyone wanted to go PK. Instead, they would ask where the rest of the group was already doing it. As long as even a few of them were online, they were in the wilderness. With the group growing, some organization became necessary. Mahatma would create the first Mayhem Makers forums, with himself and the Best PK acting as its leaders. Around this time, the clan developed a recognizable identity, wearing pink skirts to stand out, earning them the nickname the Pinkies. Despite their low combat levels, typically between 45 and 60, they were consistently taking down teams much higher level than them. Throughout the summer of 2004, Mayhem Makers built a reputation as one of the most effective and aggressive PKing groups in the game. They spent most of their time in the lower levels of the wilderness, but as their confidence grew, the group began pushing deeper and deeper into it together. However, to survive in deep wilderness fights, the Mayhem Makers started bringing in tank mages alongside their pures. With that combination, the clan found great success in the deep wilderness too. But that momentum wouldn't last forever. As summer came to an end, many clan members took breaks for school, while others shifted their focus to the members version of the game. It might come as somewhat of a surprise, but this whole time, Mahatma had not purchased RuneScape membership, despite playing for years at this point. He had been, and still was, in the free-to-play version of the game. Around this time, the clan's PKing activity slowed, remaining members focused on trading their stats, and between September and November of 2004, activity dropped off dramatically. So, Mahatma knew it was time for a change. On November 11th, 2004, the clan was rebuilt from the ground up. This time, Mayhem Makers committed fully to being a pure-only clan, initially allowing members with defense up to 40, before later lowering it to 20. Mahatma would also finally purchase RuneScape membership. By early 2005, Mayhem Makers was active again and included some of the strongest pures in the game, but they were about to lose one of their best. Around this time, the Best PK would seemingly give up on being a pure, leveling his defense past 40, and not long after that, he began playing RuneScape far less frequently, before quietly stepping away from the game altogether. For the Mayhem Makers, it was the loss of one of its founding fathers. To adapt, the clan restructured, and the High Council was created, a small group made up of the most active and trusted members, tasked with running the clan collectively. Rather than relying on a single leader, decisions were now made as a group. ensuring the clan could continue even if its founders vanished. A wise decision that will become much more relevant later. Throughout 2005, Pures dominated the wilderness, and the Mayhem makers were at the center of it. The average RuneScape player knew very little about how the game's combat system worked, let alone what a Pure was. So it was easy for these high-power accounts to dunk on just about everyone. That inevitably put Mahatma on a collision course with other legends of the era. Most notably, another legendary Pure named 3HitU. Mahatma would go up against 3HitU a few times, and both players walked away with wins. Although Mahatma wasn't making videos at the time, 3HitU recorded their battles and posted them online. For players back then, those videos were kind of a huge deal. Being able to watch two of the most feared players in the wilderness go head-to-head was something special. In mid-2005, Mahatma finally decided that he too wanted to record and upload PKing videos. On June 23, 2005, Mahatma would post his first PKing video to the internet, not to YouTube, but to the Mayhem Makers forums and other popular RuneScape fan forums. YouTube existed, but it wasn't the giant that it is today. It had yet to become popular, so video makers like Mahatma would upload their videos to sites like RapidShare and share the download links on forums. This video would quickly become popular among RuneScape players, and it's easy to see why. Mahatma relied a lot on trash talk during his kills. In his own words, he played a more mental game, keeping people distracted by talking, and then finishing them off when they type instead of eat. Just 20 seconds into his first video, a player he's fighting appears to eat something or sip a potion, to which Mahatma says, "How was the defense potion?" and then demolishes him with an Abyssal Whip special attack. This would go on to become a pretty iconic quote in the PKing community. Mahatma didn't use defense potions while PKing, even though they would have greatly benefited him, seeing as how he had such a low defense level. But many players saw using them as dishonorable, along with using damage protection prayers in 1v1 fights. Just a few minutes later into the video, he does it again, asks a player how their defense potion tastes, uses his whip special attack to hit a 29, and then says, "Well, see ya." Back then, the Abyssal Whip was an incredibly powerful special attack weapon. When used, it had a 50% chance to hit a 0 and a 50% chance to land your maximum possible hit. It was the kind of weapon that could end a fight instantly. Today, the special attack just hits with 25% increased accuracy, and in PvP transfers 10% of the target's run energy to the wielder, which is a pretty big downgrade from just instantly deleting someone. In another clip, Mahatma sees a player eat or drink a potion and says, "I saw you pot," not because drinking any potion during a fight was dishonorable, but just to throw them off their game. Mahatma himself was no stranger to drinking potions that boosted his offensive stats or restored his prayer points during fights. He just hit it very well. Mahatma clearly had some understanding of how the game's tick system worked, because if you drank a potion at the same time your character attacked someone, the drinking animation wouldn't play, so he could hide that he was drinking his potions without his opponent finding out. Food, on the other hand, was much harder to hide. Eating delayed your next attack, so Mahatma tried to limit eating to moments where it was absolutely necessary or tactically timed. In another clip from the same video, Mahatma is attacked by a player and deliberately leads them into a group of Dark Wizard NPCs. Because the area isn't multi-combat, if one of the wizards attacks his opponent, that player is forced to deal with the wizard before they can continue fighting Mahatma. His mechanics weren't flashy, but moments like this made something clear. Mahatma had an above-average understanding of how RuneScape's mechanics worked, and how to use them to his advantage. To put this video's popularity into perspective, Mahatma didn't even create a YouTube account until over a year after this video was first released. When he finally uploaded it there, it went on to rack up nearly 750,000 views, making it one of the most popular RuneScape videos of its era. Around this time, Mahatma also began rapidly raising his magic level, far faster than most players thought possible. He did so by repeatedly casting the Charge spell. Charge, when cast, imbues the player with magical power, and for the next 7 minutes, God spells will deal up to 30 damage per cast instead of just 20. But Mahatma didn't use God spells while PKing, or even while training. So why cast Charge? Well, when cast, it would give the caster 180 magic XP, and at the time, it had no cooldown, so you could spam click the spell over and over again. With enough focus, you could earn millions of magic XP per hour, but casting this spell tens of thousands of times would be quite expensive, especially because each cast required 3 blood runes, one of the most expensive runes at the time. So how did he fund it? Not with his PKing skills, but instead with a secret account. He created 2 nearly identical accounts, I.O. Henry I using the letter O, and I.O. Henry I using the number 0 instead of an O. At a glance, they looked exactly the same, but stat-wise, they were very different. The account with the 0 in its name had an extremely high magic level and access to ancient magics, at a combat level that was almost unheard of at the time. Meanwhile, the one with an O in its name was trained in a lot of different combat skills, just enough to have the same combat level as the one with the 0, while having all-around low individual combat stats. He would then take the account with the 0 in its name to the duel arena, a place where you could fight other players and stake gold and items on who would win. He would then use this account to challenge other players to duels. When his opponents checked the high scores to see what they'd be going up against, most didn't realize that his username had a 0 in it instead of an O, so they'd look up the account with the letter O by mistake. What they'd find was an account with terrible to somewhat okay stats. They could easily beat this account in a duel. Even then, his opponents were rightfully suspicious. They'd look at his stats and wonder, why would someone with such bad stats be staking so much gold? So Mahatma would play dumb, pretending to be inexperienced, unsure, even hesitant. He'd say things like, "My friend let me borrow this item. I don't know if I should stake it." He'd show a valuable item in the stake window, then decline at the last second. Once his opponent sensed doubt, their own doubts disappeared. They'd agree to the stake, confident it was a free win. And when the duel started, Mahatma would simply freeze them in place and end the fight. It wasn't fair, something Mahatma later openly admitted, but justified it by saying no stake ever really is. Nearly all of the profit from these stakes went into funding 99 magic on Mahatma I, all while his fans and clanmates had no idea that was how he earned the money, until years later when he publicly revealed it. In total, he managed to earn over 250 million gold doing this, which back then was a pretty enormous amount of money. It wouldn't be the last time a RuneScape PKing legend quietly funded their success through deception, such as Elfmage, who I've also made a full documentary on, but unlike others who followed, Mahatma never glamorized it, never encouraged, and never built his reputation around it. He kept it secret until years later. Over the following months, Mahatma continued releasing more videos, and with each one, his reputation only grew. They were mostly of himself solo PKing, but he would include clips here and there of him with fellow Mayhem makers. He'd also go up against more legends from that era, like Mexico, and even killed Zezima in Castle Wars once. As always, his videos were full of trash talk and ego, but unlike most players, Mahatma could actually back it up. Mayhem makers would also see a big surge in interest. The clan soon contained hundreds of dedicated members who would follow Mahatma to the ends of the earth. Their clan uniform would also change a bit. Although it was still common to see Mayhem makers in pink skirts, Mahatma came up with some new items for the clan to wear: pink hats and a pink Team 6 cape, making them instantly recognizable wherever they went. And for a brief moment in RuneScape's history, they ruled the wilderness. But the balance of power in RuneScape was starting to shift. In late 2006 and early 2007, things were changing fast. The game started to receive content that made being a Pure much harder. New powerful upgrades that Pures didn't have access to, like Barrow's Gloves, the Vengeance spell, the Rune Defender, and the Fighter Torso, gave main accounts strong new tools to defend themselves. Pures were still viable account builds, but their era of absolute dominance was ending. Around this time, Mahatma would post his 6th pure PKing video, and then he would start to disappear from RuneScape for weeks at a time, returning occasionally to attend clan events hosted by the Mayhem makers. Leaders on the High Council would take the reins while he was gone, but he would always come back. He was just playing less than before for now. But the years that followed would be difficult for the Mayhem makers and for Wilderness PvP as a whole. In late 2007, Jagex made the controversial decision to turn the Wilderness into a safe zone, as well as heavily restrict player-to-player trading, part of a broader effort to combat the game's growing problems with real-world trading and credit card fraud. I've covered this in detail before a few times, but the short version is that players were buying RuneScape items through third-party websites run by gold farmers. Those gold farmers would often steal the buyer's credit card details, then use them to purchase membership on large numbers of bot accounts, which were used to farm even more gold that they could sell. When players noticed their details had been stolen and used elsewhere, they'd call their credit card company and file a chargeback. This led to a flood of chargebacks coming from RuneScape's website, and credit card companies warned Jagex that if it continued, they would stop working with them. So Jagex responded by heavily restricting almost every method that players had to transfer items between one another. But the Wilderness wasn't just another area of the game. For many players, it was RuneScape. Mahatma once said that he only played the game to PK. The only time he ever trained non-combat skills was to meet quest requirements that unlocked better gear. Jagex knew that removing the Wilderness outright would leave a massive void, so on the same day it was made safe, they introduced replacements. The Bounty Hunter minigame attempted to recreate high-risk PKing inside a dedicated arena, while Clan Wars offered structured, safe clan versus clan fights. For some players, these were acceptable substitutes. The Mayhem makers hosted a number of events in both, and Mahatma himself would even show up for a lot of them. But these minigames just weren't the Wilderness. So about a year later, PvP worlds were introduced. Instead of confining player killing to a single area in small minigames, these worlds allowed players to attack each other almost anywhere on the map, outside of a few designated safe zones like banks and respawn points. The reward you got from killing another player depended on how much you were risking, so you had to bring valuable items with you to earn worthwhile rewards. And the more time you spent outside safe areas while risking items, the better your potential drops became. Just like in the Wilderness, attacking a player first meant you'd become Scold and lose everything on death. In effect, PvP worlds were Jagex's attempt to reintroduce high-risk player killing into the main game without fully restoring the old Wilderness. And for a while, it worked. Soon after their launch, Mahatma I would post his first video in nearly 3 years, but not on his pure. He had another account that he would occasionally play on, but never really gave much screen time. It was called Mahatma I, but there were 2 spaces before the second I instead of just 1. This account was his tank, which had 99 defense, 99 ranged, and an overall combat level of 102. This video was a pretty shocking comeback for a lot of players who hadn't heard Mahatma's name in years, and it performed quite well. It didn't have nearly as much smack talk as his previous videos, but he definitely made sure to slip in some absolutely wild insults. This one in particular, where he asks his opponent how much food you got, and then before they even have time to respond, says, "You eat like a pig," caught me just so off guard. Fans hoped he would return to making new videos, especially because the video was labeled Part 1, but over the next year and a half, that never really happened. Instead, he re-uploaded older videos to his YouTube channel that had previously only been shared on forums. The following year, in 2010, he did upload a handful of new videos on his pure, but it was different from his older content. They were almost always large group fights in Clan Wars or PvP worlds with the Mayhem makers, not the solo content that made him famous. But then, in 2011, Jagex made an announcement almost no one expected. If the players wanted it, the wilderness would be made dangerous again, and trade restrictions would be lifted. By that point, Jagex's technology had improved significantly since 2007. They no longer needed such drastic measures to combat chargebacks and fraud, and in a surprise to pretty much no one, players overwhelmingly voted to bring the wilderness back. But when it finally returned, things weren't quite the same. Mahatma would only ever post 2 videos in the restored wilderness, and both were group trips with the Mayhem makers. The wilderness was so much different than during Mahatma's peak over half a decade ago. With all the new items, prayers, and spells that had been released, if he wanted to solo PK again, there would be a lot he would have to learn. To make matters worse, the following year, Jagex introduced an update known as the Evolution of Combat, a complete overhaul of RuneScape's combat system, gear, and weaponry. It was almost unrecognizable compared to the game many players had grown up with, and wilderness activity collapsed nearly overnight. The Mayhem makers continued to exist, but in far smaller numbers. Many of its members drifted away from the live game entirely, choosing instead to play on RuneScape private servers rather than adapt to what RuneScape had become. Jagex eventually realized they had made a major mistake. Things were going so poorly that they were genuinely considering rolling back the Evolution of Combat update entirely and returning the game to how it was before, but by then it was already too late. Instead, in early 2013, they announced the launch of Old School RuneScape, a version of the game built from a 2007 backup. Almost immediately, the Mayhem makers returned in full force, and somewhat unexpectedly, Mahatma I returned with them. But it didn't last long. Not long after his return, Mahatma disappeared once again. Even without their leader, the Mayhem makers continued on. They went on to win multiple trophies in the 2013 Jagex Clan Cup, proving that the legacy Mahatma helped build was still very much alive. But in a final, almost fitting twist, the clan disbanded the very same day they won. For many of the clan's members, especially those on the High Council, Old School RuneScape was more of a nostalgic reunion than a fresh start. A chance to revisit the past, not relive it indefinitely. With their leader gone and everyone in very different places in their lives than they had been a decade ago, continuing on no longer made sense. So they figured, why not end things on a high note? Not to mention, they would now also be immortalized in the game forever. Today, their Clan Cup victories can still be read on the Clan Cup trophy near the Giants Foundry in Al-Kharid. There were even discussions about giving the Mayhem makers their own in-game statue to commemorate their wins, but that idea never came to fruition. Here's a version of it that Mod Ash designed in his spare time to give players an idea of what it could look like. He and the rest of the Old School team wanted to wait until they hired a dedicated artist, since statues would need to be created for all of the Clan Cup winners, and not just one team. Many Mayhem makers were genuinely excited by the possibility. They saw it as a way to permanently cement Mahatma's legacy inside the game. And to this day, many of them still view that unused statue concept not just as a monument to the Mayhem makers, but as a statue of Mahatma himself. Although he didn't participate in the Clan Cup, their victory gathering and speeches make it obvious that he still meant a lot to them. Unfortunately, by the time the Old School team was able to hire their first artist, many months had passed, and there were much higher priority things that needed to be designed. They would just narrowly miss their chance to immortalize Mahatma in the game's history visually, as winners in the 2014 Clan Cup did get statues added to commemorate their wins, which were placed outside of Clan Wars, which in Old School RuneScape existed in the desert. However, they shouldn't feel too bad about missing this chance, as when Clan Wars was moved to Pharaoh's Enclave in 2020, the statues would be deleted entirely. Now, since Mahatma's last disappearance in 2013, none of the former Mayhem makers have been able to make contact with him, and that's not from a lack of trying. Over the past few weeks, I've spoken with more than a dozen former members, all of whom were incredibly helpful with this story, and it's clear that they still miss him and wish he'd come back. But to this day, nobody seems to know where he is or what he's doing. As for why Mahatma vanished, I think the answer is fairly clear. He never announced his departure, and he never properly explained his absence. but the game itself had fundamentally changed. The wilderness he helped shape in the early 2000s just didn't exist anymore. And even when old school RuneScape launched, it wasn't a true return to that era. The average player was far more knowledgeable, far more efficient, and far better at PKing. And the same updates and mechanics that made pure builds harder to maintain in 2006 and 2007 were also still there. The game moved on and so did he, but the impact he left behind didn't disappear with him. For a generation of players, Mahatma I wasn't just part of the wilderness, he was the wilderness. Check out the video on the right about Elvemage. He was another PKing legend from the same era, but his story took a much darker turn.